I'm Megan Gretinger. I work for the Iowa State University Papa John Center for Entrepreneurship, and we're putting on the Start Something series. This is the last of this year's series about passive income, and today we're going to talk about crypto and NFTs. A little bit of etiquette before we get started. So if you could just leave your videos off and stay muted, that'll just help us with brand bandwidth. And if you have questions, we really encourage you to use the chat. Comments, questions, they're all welcome. We would love for you to interact in the chat. This is being recorded for YouTube, so just FYI. Today we have multiple great guests here to help. First, I'll introduce our two student entrepreneurs who are going to be moderating today's session. Collin and Jacob have a company called Campus Down Trading, and I will pass the mic over to you so you guys can explain what you do and who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Collin, and
Jacob.
that's Jacob, and we run Campus Down Trading, and that's basically a financial education company, and it's basically a private group per se where people subscribe and they get various educational tools, resources, and overall just a community of like-minded individuals. But enough talk about us. We're going to introduce Scott, our man of the day, and kind of ask him the questions about NFTs and crypto. So, Scott, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself, talk a little about yourself?
Sure. Hey, I'm Scott, Scott Herren, entrepreneur. Been a Iowa State alum since 2013, and moved out to San Diego I got a finance degree and entrepreneurship minor, and wanted to get into startups. Was really excited about kind of the potential of entrepreneurship and small budding businesses. So found out like marketing analytics was a good kind of entry spot. So started my career kind of like figuring out how to convert folks in marketing funnels. Eventually moved out to San Diego to surf for a little bit and met a girl in a whiskey bar out there. So I've been following her around. So I'm in Iowa City currently for a few years. So it's nice to be a little bit closer to home. Got to go to a few football games and basketball games this year. Found out about Ethereum in 2015. Got really excited about kind of the potential of smart contracts and cryptocurrencies generally. I had heard about Bitcoin, but was kind of skeptical. Eventually started trading and kind of continued just trading currencies through the bull run in 2017, 2018. And after that, I was kind of like driven to get into the space deeper. So I started hacking on stuff. A lot of folks weren't really hiring product people, which I had transitioned into. And so I started figuring out how to hack on my own projects a little bit more and actually build things, and basically been full-time in the space since 2020.
That's awesome. So, Scott, what are NFTs? What is crypto for a basic level for audience?
Sure. So I guess let's reverse it and take crypto first. So Bitcoin, the original cryptocurrency, is a blockchain, and it holds a bunch of coins. Basically, when Satoshi Nakamoto, this pseudonymous group or person, decided to launch the white paper in Bitcoin, they really wanted to solve this double spend problem. They wanted to figure out how to allow you to transact and not potentially get ripped off by that. If I send you $5, Collin, and then I send the same $5 to Jacob, that becomes a problem. I've created money out of thin air. So far, we've used trusted intermediaries to do this, banks mostly. Financial technology companies have kind of filled that gap recently. Mostly they've been there to facilitate that. It's been slow. The innovation hasn't really been there. There's been a lot of lack of exit rights there. Your best alternative is like a credit union. So like in order to make sure that you don't double spend, we need to make sure that the transactions are being validated. And so that's what these miners or validators are doing. So they earn the new Bitcoins to make sure that your transactions are valid and that you haven't basically double spent those funds. And so most cryptocurrencies are fungible: Ether, Bitcoin, etc. A lot of the top tier currencies are fungible. So non-fungible tokens are the inverse of that, basically representing unique artifacts, digital assets, other things that you can cryptographically secure. They can either represent real world assets or just wholly digital things. some of the early NFTs like CryptoPunks and CryptoKitties were just pictures, references on chain. Yeah.
Gotcha. So I think a lot of people know that we can like buy and sell and just trade crypto and NFTs, but how can we use them for like passive income compared to as active income?
Yeah, so there's a few different opportunities for kind of passively interacting with the systems, since a lot of these systems are trying to act like protocols and allow folks to be participants in these ecosystems. They can earn rewards for participating. So it really depends on the definition of passive, but there's a wide range of like passive opportunities, including staking and providing these validating services. Sometimes that requires upfront capital, so it's not as easy to access, but is very passive in that regard. Usually those just take a few hours a week or a month to kind of maintain. Other things like minting NFTs are very easy to get started with, but are probably more active in the actual engagement and to actually have successful sales. There's actually like full-time contributing to decentralized organizations and these protocols and earning rewards from their budgets and treasuries and things like that. So yeah.
Cool. So what is like the work to like, so you mentioned how it's kind of, there's some options that are kind of passive, kind of active. Like what is the time frame of like time to invest into these things to maintain them each week, to make them like passive and active? Like what is the commitment per week?
It kind of depends on your skill set and kind of which things fit with what you're willing and able to do. Some of the staking and mining requirements are quite technical or require like significant upfront costs. So those are kind of less attainable. Whereas like minting NFTs, since Ethereum's like an open protocol, anybody with a wallet and gas can go and mint an NFT. It's not guaranteed that you're going to be able to sell that NFT to anyone necessarily, but there's obviously like a potential market there. The actual creation of the NFTs can vary depending on like how complex you want to do it. There's different services that provide tools to be able to kind of spin that up yourself. There's other things like trading and like contributing that are, as you guys know, like much more active and in participation. There are staking opportunities where you can stake some assets and they earn interest. So that's kind of another form of passive income. It can be negligible in some cases, depending on how many assets you're working with and what the return looks like on those. But yeah, definitely very passive. That's kind of what DeFi, decentralized finance, is going for, is providing these different rails for banking services, borrowing and lending, being able to earn interest on your assets via lending.
Nice. This kind of lead me to the next question. Can anyone create an NFT? And what are the steps to do so?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So you just need a little bit of technical wherewithal to get your contract deployed or work with a curious developer. Anybody with a wallet and some gas can go and deploy these contracts. That's all they are, is just a contract or a program on one of these blockchains, Ethereum being one of the more popular ones for some of the more well-known NFTs. It's a fairly straightforward process. There's a lot of different examples that are out there. So if you want a very simple vanilla NFT, you can go and leverage the vanilla standards that are out there, basically copy some code and again, pay this little bit of gas fee to deploy the contract. And then you have an NFT that you can go mint. There's different platforms like NiftyKid and Auto Minter that provide this service as well. So you can just go and tell it what you want for traits and the rarities for those traits and upload images. The NFT market is definitely morphing as far as like where those are valuable. Over the last year or so, there's been popularity around art and open editions. a lot of profile pictures, using a verifiable profile picture to interact in these new social media experiences. So those are kind of ways that you can get started.
Awesome. It's kind of moving on to the actual value of the NFTs. How does someone go about pricing their own NFTs or seeing the prices of everything else? Is it kind of like listed out like what a brokerage would do in the stock market, or same with kind of cryptocurrencies, Binance? Is there a specific place where you would go and kind of get the list of everything on there?
Yeah, so OpenSea is probably the most well-known secondary marketplace. You can find lots of different NFTs. That's kind of the beauty of this interoperable system, is that anybody can build a marketplace that interacts with these. It's not siloed into one particular system. So there's several different exchanges that you can list it on, Blur, Magic Eden, among others that you can go and find NFTs and find their floor price is the nomenclature for basically the lowest price that you could acquire one of the assets in the set. There's different ways to price your assets. This is a classic artist dilemma. Obviously, there's a simple economic equation behind it of sell it for the most that any buyer will pay for it. But obviously, that's easier said than done. So it's definitely a test it out, see how it goes. You can mint something. If you're just putting out random images that you have on your computer, those probably aren't going to be very valuable. But if you're coming up with new 3D assets or something that can be derivative upon, then those become a little bit more interesting.
Nice. All right.
Gotcha. And
And
something
so,
you mentioned when you're talking about the price quick was gas fees. Do you want to quickly talk about what those are?
Sure. So all blockchains use a form of gas or a small payment to process any transaction. This is a form of spam prevention, basically making folks not waste all of the computation resources of the nodes that are hosting the actual software. So these fees tend to range kind of depending on market congestion, but back in 2017, 2018, the Ethereum fees got really crazy. They were like $50 to $100 to send anything. They're much more reasonable, of like a couple dollars, with goals of minimizing those down to several pennies, sub pennies. Those are just the gas fees that it costs, or the transaction costs for basically doing any sort of send or interacting with a smart contract, deploying a smart contract. Those vary depending on how computationally expensive they are.
Gotcha. It seems like we got a question in chat here. Question is, will the pictures of the original paintings become an NFT? So I think she's
yeah, so the kind of question about what is an NFT and kind of can art be captured as NFTs or representative as NFTs. I think you'll find a lot of commonalities between NFTs and like certificates of authenticity. Usually a buyer won't go and buy something without an authentic signature, some appraiser coming along and doing that. This kind of allows us to have the blockchain provide us that service. Any of us could probably go and create CryptoPunks now. They're 64-bit images of people, and they're not too difficult to recreate, but everybody knows through social consensus which one was the original contract for these images. And so any duplicates is just a derivative or a copycat or just outright scam. So there's a wide variation of the freedom. There is able to allow anybody to innovate or derivative on top of your work, but at the same time, we all know via social consensus which one's the original in those particular cases. So yeah, that's kind of how I compare it, is more to an authenticity certificate.
Gotcha. Jacob, do you want to go into like kind of the risks associated with crypto NFTs?
yep, absolutely. So yeah, let's bring that up. So what are the risks associated with crypto and NFTs? I know this is a lot different than on the stock market side of things. It's kind of a volatile market. Would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Sure. There's a lot of risks and a lot of maybe blown out of proportion risks, but the kind of different organizing bodies have not necessarily come to consensus around that. So a lot of lawyers will tell you that it's still kind of a gray area in a lot of cases. You're taking a lot of best judgments. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, so this is not legal advice. There's a lot of different interesting things that could happen. Basically, blockchain mining and validating could be banned in different countries and states. Illinois recently proposed some interesting regulation around validating transactions of Illinois citizens. There's obviously risks of like incumbent risk of like some of these blockchains getting usurped by other new innovative chains and things like that, depending on how their network effects lead. Crypto as a payment has potential of being blacklisted at national and state levels just to kind of protect incumbent interests there again. It is kind of confusing currently as the IRS currently treats it as property, and the SEC claims that most crypto and tokens fall under their jurisdiction, claiming that they're securities. Recent filings from the CFTC showed that they claim that it's commodities. And then OFAC is stepping in and sanctioning different contracts for interacting with potential hackers across the world that are sanctioned entities. So there's financial risk of investing generally. If these blockchains find severe bugs, they've been operating for 15 years now, so we're getting out of the infancy stage of these and finding real use cases. So the risk is being plateaued quite a bit, which is exciting, but there's definitely different interesting regulatory and national level questions to be answered still.
Awesome. Looks like we have a question in the chat. What is your opinion on NFTs becoming utilitarian and being able to track sales of assets on the blockchain? Are we close to adoption, or is there a bit of lag currently?
Sure. So there's already NFTs that have utility. I think maybe even looking at your guys' organization, there's a lot of different organizations that are organizing as investing collectives via NFT membership. So just issuing NFTs to all the members, and then that gives you access to any of the insights and tools and things like that. So it just becomes a very easy permissions record system for any folks. If they decide they don't like your advice anymore, they can go sell your pass on chain, and somebody else can buy that and join in the group and in the conversation. Yeah, there's a bunch of tickets that are being sold as NFTs now. So you can get tickets for NFTs or for events and resell them. Another, like, you're never at risk of buying a counterfeit NFT on StubHub or something like that, because you're able to verify that it was from the issuer that you're looking for. Avenged Sevenfold is doing pre-sales tickets to NFT holders, so it's giving you exclusive discounts and early access to interesting events and things like that, all access opportunities.
Nice. So if you had to start from the actual basics, you know nothing, what would be the first thing you would do? How would you get started in learning about crypto and NFTs?
Yeah, this is a tough
Big
question because the space has changed so much since I got started. We were reading white papers and just trading when I was getting started, and now there's DAOs to contribute to and protocols to actually work with. So definitely using it is the best way to kind of experience the novelty and the interesting opportunities. Try an automated market maker exchange that doesn't have orders in a traditional stock market exchange. Try some of these other lending markets where there's no real intermediary between you and the other parties. All it takes is downloading a wallet on your phone. Rainbow is a great example. Getting a little bit of ETH for the gas fees. Ideally, you could use Optimism. Coinbase is working on its own layer 2, basically a network that's connected to a base chain that's more secure. So we are able to scale up these transactions back to those penny transaction fees instead of some of the expensive transaction fees that we've been having, while not sacrificing any of that security. One of my favorite examples for a good starting app is Pool Together, which I was fortunate enough to hack on in 2019 at ETH Denver. Basically, Pool Together is a prize link savings account. We pool a bunch of funds together, earn some interest on those funds. Somebody wins the interest, everybody else gets their principal back. So it's an interesting way to incentivize people to save funds without putting any of that at risk. And it's happened in the traditional world through credit unions and such, but there's a lot of overhead that comes along with cutting those checks and actually managing that, where blockchain really is suited to kind of handle all of that with very little overhead, which is awesome. So that's usually my recommendation is get some USDC in your wallet. USDC is like a stable coin that's provided by Coinbase and its affiliates. It is a very stable opportunity to maintain the peg to the dollar, and then you can deposit that into Pool Together and start getting potential winnings. Otherwise, go buy an NFT or mint an NFT. Don't necessarily buy it for it's going to return you value, but just to try out the experience and see what it means to actually do that and why you might want to launch your own NFT.
So when it comes to buying crypto NFTs, there's a lot of like platforms and apps, right? And some apps I think of are like Coinbase, Binance, and a bunch of other apps. Are there any apps or anything that you don't recommend or do recommend? Because we have seen, failures of some exchanges and stuff like that. So is there any red flags and something when people are looking for an app or platform to utilize for their wallet or purchasing crypto or NFTs?
Yeah, for the most part, you don't really need to steer clear of Coinbase. I mean, Coinbase is definitely the best option and the most household name. So definitely an easy place to get started. Trying to take advantage of any tax advantages is a great opportunity. Fidelity and others are starting to provide this in IRAs and things, especially if you're not really planning on trading regularly. Like we mentioned earlier, it can be quite volatile. I think over the 15 years, we've proven the track record that it does still kind of go up and to the right, but it has its drops, and they can be quite fast. So yeah, keeping your trading to a minimum as you're getting started, and finding tax advantaged accounts through Fidelity and others. There's a lot of traditional brokers that are coming online with providing on-chain assets. Gemini has been good, but they're tied up in the FTX fiasco. Unfortunately, FTX had a lot of the good signs, so it's honestly really spooked a lot of folks as far as what does look like a good exchange, but still really confident in Coinbase and some of the others. A lot of folks have unfortunately had to stop providing services to the US just because of the regulations being fairly unfriendly so far. Coinbase being one of the major exceptions.
Nice. So it looks like we have a question in chat. I always receive invitations to join WhatsApp groups of people who are selling these cryptocurrencies. How do I distinguish them from pyramid scams or just kind of like meme coins in general?
Yeah, you'll get a lot of these. Maybe the question will come up and I'll suggest you join a Discord as well. Like, you'll get random DMs from anyone, and do not listen to any of them. They don't need your help and they don't need your money. If it's not like an officially sanctioned site for one of your favorite communities, don't be putting your keys in anywhere. Like, don't sign transactions that you don't know what they're doing. There's cool tools these days, like Join Fire is actually reading the transaction and trying to tell you what's going to happen in that transaction. We've had a lot of folks lose their NFTs because they sign a transaction that they don't understand, and then somebody has basically written a transaction that takes all their NFTs away, which sucks really hard. But yeah, most of these are going to be scams. I don't think you want to try to decipher them. Just ignore almost all of them. Maybe that's a good opportunity to segue into like where you should find some good resources. So I'll go ahead and dig into that. Find some good publications. The Bankless podcast and newsletter is awesome. The Defiant There's some very big names that come out of the Ethereum space that have a lot of knowledge on these topics. Leverage YouTube, but like being very careful about who you're finding on YouTube. There's a lot of Ethereum conferences, DevCon, ETH Denver, and they have a lot of good talks and things like that. If you're just looking at like daily update videos on YouTube, be very leery of like those people that are just kind of trading signals and looking for those buys and sells. Obviously, if you're trying to trade, that's a different story, but most of us probably aren't looking for that type of scalp. Most of the headlines on crypto come from Twitter. So finding your different interesting apps on Twitter and then following them, jumping into their Discord, like I was saying, that you might get random DMs in Discord. Those are almost all scams as well. Yeah, pop into a Discord, ask some questions about exchanges or their lending policies, ask for transparency reports about these protocols. For staking specifically and the most passive income option, check out DAppNode is a great staking software for actually doing some of this validation stuff yourself, fairly non-technical for what it is.
Gotcha. So you touched briefly on it with the tax advantage accounts and how that sort of works. So how are taxes treated? Because you did mention before, you said the SEC treats them as securities, IRS says no, they're property, someone else says they're commodities. So how are taxes dealt with, whether I'm trading crypto, whether I'm just buying and holding, any sort of like legal implications, stuff along that lines?
Sure. So it's still a bit of a gray area. There's some legal challenges going through the courts as we speak. But yeah, as you said, most of it's treated as property by the IRS, so that counts as a sale on any sale or purchase. So it requires you to keep track of your cost basis, basically the cost that you acquired it at, and then you're basically paying capital gains on any sale. The tricky part that the IRS made in there was in 2017, 2018, adding that basically crypto to crypto transfers or exchanges are also counted as one of those sales. So basically trading Bitcoin for Ether incurs a taxable sale for Bitcoin, and then there's a new cost basis for that Ether that you just acquired. So your tax nightmare definitely goes up quite significantly as you're trying to keep track of these. The tools are getting better, and if it's advantageous enough, you can seek out external services that will help you wrangle a lot of that. NFT sales are generally treated like conventional revenue. It will largely depend on what the entity is that's receiving the revenue from that as to how it'll be taxed. Obviously, if it's just an individual receiving that, it's just taxed as ordinary income. It'll vary if it's a corporation or a nonprofit potentially. Definitely, if you get this far, consult an accountant.
Gotcha. So would NFTs be counted as like a product or like a service being sold? Because you mentioned how like they could have some utility and they could like the NFT itself could have more utilizations and could be like services. So would that be classified as like a service being transacted or a product?
I don't think it'll affect the tax status. I think you'll basically have to pay similar tax regardless of how it's classified there. I think it'll depend on what kind of NFT, if it's a actual piece of art or represents in real life asset, or if it's like a club pass or something like that. Those could be considered services potentially. So I think it'll kind of depend on what kinds of NFTs those are.
Gotcha. So moving on to like how general public and mass media, you mentioned Twitter is a big one for finding information on crypto NFTs. I'm sure Reddit is too. What are your thoughts on how since around COVID, how crypto NFTs have really taken the mass media attention on Twitter and whatnot? Like, do you think this is a good or bad thing for the space, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky thing of like, the space, like the way that the space operates, it doesn't really have control over that, unfortunately. It's interesting because in 2020, when we had DeFi Summer, which is our canonical name for the summer of 2020, when all of these decentralized finance projects basically popped up and started trying to innovate and fork each other. A lot of that was very interesting, and the bull bear cycle was fairly short, and then the NFT bull cycle kind of cycled kind of quickly after that. The NFT or the DeFi stuff seemed to be interesting, but it's just not that interesting to mass folks. Like earning a few percent interest on a bank account isn't that exciting, even if you are getting basically nothing in a current savings account, or used to not be getting anything in those savings accounts. Yeah, I lost it.
Here, I'll transition. So
Cool.
what are your thoughts on like the celebrity aspect of
Sure.
we've seen a lot of celebrities being paid or pushed to promote these projects, and they turn out to be scams, or they just go like crashing down. We've seen this a lot with so many celebrities. What do you think this is going to continue? Do you think this is going to be regulated or looked at? Do you think this is a good thing to get crypto more in the eyes of people? What are your thoughts on just the celebrity combination with the whole crypto NFTs?
Yeah, thanks. That reminds me where I was going. So the NFTs became a lot more appealing to more culture, right? Like you can relate a little bit more with a profile picture or with a piece of art versus like a financial token, like isn't really something to look at in your wallet or anything like that. You're just kind of earning a tiny bit of interest. It's very mundane, for lack of a better term, whereas NFTs really spiced it up and provided interesting things to interact with, potential utilities, future innovations. And NFTs are actually one of the things that weren't explicitly mentioned in the Ethereum white paper. Basically, a lot of these other innovations were kind of predicted. Some of them haven't worked out as well as we thought, but NFTs was one that wasn't really foreseen by some of the greats. And it's interesting that that's kind of latched on. But I mean, as they become more collectible, you have that legacy collectible mentality and things like that. So it's been interesting to see how the media has latched on to the high prices. Obviously, the media does the same thing with the Bitcoin prices when it gets high and things like that, just reporting on those regularly, and that drives interest and eyes. So we definitely need to be more responsible about it. Like you said, there's been a lot of celebrities that have been promoting things. Unfortunately, there's platforms like Cameo, and you can get a celebrity to say just about anything you want for like $1,000. So it's not on them necessarily. I think their media teams are starting to get smarter about it. We've started to see some injunctions or different fines coming down from the SEC as some of these cases settle. So we are starting to see the regulation pan out, even though it's just basically the same securities laws. It's just the actual cases are being levied against these folks. So I think we'll start to see less and less of the media teams pushing on it or allowing celebs to just accidentally cameo bad projects. But I mean, just as the same as it's difficult for us to decipher, it's very difficult for them to decipher, and they're very busy and just want to make some extra bucks, I'm sure. But at the same time, you have a lot of great celebrities that are coming into the space. I mean, you got different folks like Paris Hilton and Snoop Dogg that are very active in NFT collection and experiencing women or minority art and trying to kind of help underserved artists. There's a big music NFT scene that's growing right now. And so just kind of proving another use case of they don't necessarily have to be pieces of art or profile pictures necessarily. They can be different representations of actual value. Eventually those music NFTs can handle royalties. I know there's been a couple of interesting experiments, Kings of Leon and others, that have actually sold parts of their royalties. Unfortunately, those have to go to accredited investors, just given our securities laws, but those experiments can hopefully be exposed to more traditional retail eventually, but we need to figure out how to kind of, allow those to be done safely. Yeah.
All right, looks like we have a question in chat. So where is actual crypto money being used? For example, can I take it to a local market and buy groceries and stuff like that online, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different online retailers that have accepted it. Unfortunately, some of the gas fees got really intensive in 2017, 2018, so that kind of hampered a lot of the adoption there. I think one of the reasons that we haven't really seen significant point of sale, POS adoption is just because of the accounting necessary. If you accept Bitcoin and you're automatically liable for the potential capital gains, it just becomes an accounting headache that you didn't really want to deal with. There's starting to be systems on the market today that are automatically transitioning that to whatever currency you wanted to accept. So you're not really liable for that potential gains. You can be immediately into whatever currency you want, providing the flexibility for your customer to pay in whatever currency they want. And it kind of seamlessly handles it in the back end. Fortunately, that's been very cumbersome up until late. Mobile wallets haven't really been adopted up until the last year or so. So we're kind of just waiting on some of these infrastructure pieces to work out so that we can kind of start to accept that. It's definitely been one of the big thing, like the big knocks on the space is that it's not really tangible. I know a lot of people look to point of sale as a mass adoption use case. But like a lot of those retailers and bars and things like that are kind of mom and pop shops and a lot harder to get into than you would think. And the big grocery chains are very tied into the systems that they already have. So coming in and usurping that, you have to provide quite a lot of value. Basically, as soon as you start talking to one of those businesses, they're like, but nobody has cryptocurrency, so why would I care about accepting cryptocurrency, which just puts us back into the chicken and egg. And so, yeah, I think some of the Bitcoin folks have been kind of focusing on larger markets like gold and things like that. Ethereum's really focusing on this infrastructure layer, providing those online sales. When you're getting into the real world, there's a lot more red tape and things like that. So it's been easier to start kind of in these digital assets and things like that. But we're seeing a lot of experiments over the last couple of years around in real life and exit ramps, on and off ramps, like you guys were asking earlier, is like, where can I get current crypto? Those have been fewer and further between, but we're starting to get a lot more. Robinhood has a wallet directly in it that you can actually withdraw out of. Some of the other digital custodies are allowing you to do that as well.
Awesome. It's like we have another question in chat here. So with regards to crypto and NFTs, what functions do you see turning to this technology that there is not today? So what is special about crypto and NFTs coming in the space? And then also any opinion on CBDC?
So we'll start with the CBDC, I guess. I think that CBDC is probably inevitable to compete with this open financial system. I know the Fed or whoever announced Fed Now, which is like a kind of a step towards that for the actual banking partners, but it doesn't look like that will be open to retail for quite some time. There's a lot of concerns with the CBDC just around surveillance and buyer protections and things like that. There's a lot of things that are instituted in the right of safety, but can be abused by the wrong powers. I think that's a lot of what we're shooting for with the cryptocurrency space, is trying to provide opportunities to keep powers in check without relying on large institutional overhead. It's hard to say on like what is going to be next. Like I was saying, I definitely didn't predict NFTs blowing up like they did. I would have bought a lot more CryptoPunks when I first heard about them, and some of these other big things. There's just cool new ways that all of these technologies can start to be used together. I think a lot of the very interesting use cases for blockchain are still like remain to be discovered. A lot of the things that we need to prove out first is kind of like the storage of value. I always like to go to my favorite use case potentially is that like my generation and your guys' generation will probably not own a single house. We'll probably own like 100 shards, like 100 shards of 100 homes. And so then we all collectively own a significantly de-risked asset, even though we still own like the rights to our actual property. Those types of things need to have the actual value figured out, but we're proving that with monkey pictures to start with. If we can secure monkey pictures on the chain and build awesome tools around that, then it provides this infrastructure to larger real life assets and digital contracts that are already happening. Similarly with rent and things like that are already happening on chain when you sell a house on it as an NFT, and then the holders can receive the rental payments through that. So we're really just starting to explore some of these initiatives. Similarly with voting, if we can figure out identity on the blockchain, then we can start voting on our phone potentially via these protected and transparent ledgers. So yeah, there's a lot of folks that are working on different angles that this can be pushed forward. A lot of things moving to the, like I was saying, this layer 2 technologies that are scaling these transactions significantly higher. So we can have things like game transactions and assets that are on chain, and other primitives that get you started into smaller microtransactions and things like that with subscriptions.
Awesome. So yeah, so going more into the utilization, like you said, like what are your thoughts on projects? Like I know Gary Vaynerchuk, for example, he has his VFriends project where he sells his NFTs, and this one that he sells might get you dinner with him for a day, or this one you get to fly with him on his private jet. And I know like Mark Cuban has done a lot with this space of with his Dallas Mavericks that he owns, and trying to get NFTs and utilize into that. Do you see this continuing? Do you think this will be adopted more, or is this just a temporary kind of thing?
Yeah, this is 100% like just a growing technology. Like this is just one like use for the medium of NFTs and blockchain. Gary and Mark are very smart investors. They are paid and incentivized to spot these types of trends and bet on these outcomes. Gary is honestly one of the better examples for this celebrity question that you guys had, was that like Gary was early on this space in 2020 or so when he launched the initial VFriends. It was announced that it would include the 3 years of conference attendance, which is already putting the ticket utility to work, which has been pretty awesome, because I know last year they did it in Minneapolis, and I think this year's in like Kentucky or something like that. So they're really starting to hit some of these off-brand cities, which is awesome. There's actually an NFT NYC that's happening this week, and DAO Tokyo over the weekend in Tokyo, Japan. But it's great to see Gary supporting some of these underrated cities, and I'm sure you can get a little better deal on all of the venue and stuff. But yeah, it's great to see kind of how that is percolating. Obviously there's going to be bad actors in the space, like we were talking about with the Cameo and stuff. So there's going to be some bad experiments and some not good things, but we got to like see how it goes and try it out. Different car companies have been launching their different non-fungible experiences. I think McLaren just announced one this week as well. So it's just trying to figure out what these mean. Is it a collectible of past historical events, or am I collecting the events of the current? A lot of those are just big brands that are trying to figure out how this technology works for them. And it's exciting to see the experiments. Obviously, we should be pretty leery. Don't go aping into Scottie Pippen shoes for no reason, unless you can figure out why those are important to you. But that's kind of where a lot of the value's been derived recently, in that collectible / value feel. But hoping that we can see more brands diving in. Another good example that I didn't kind of bring up earlier is the Ethereum name service is actually an NFT. So ENS is basically a short representation of your address. So if I want you to be able to send to my address, I don't have to give you the 48 character string. I can say scotchpreneur.eth, and you can go and type that in, and your wallet can find my address pretty easily. So these are just like the types of primitives that we have to work with. And brands like Budweiser and others are finding those tools, and Budweiser bought beer.eth last year, for example, and just finding ways to represent themselves in these digital spaces and figuring out how these digital assets can transform how they interact with customers and things like that. So yeah, I'm excited to see how these continue to transform and learn from these experiments.
That kind of leads us to our next question. So what areas would you recommend focusing on from a longevity perspective?
Since you guys are students, I'll kind of gear it in that direction. And crypto businesses are a lot like all other types of businesses. They need operational folks, they need branding folks, developers, leaders, growers. If you can find a way to contribute to any business, you can definitely find a way to contribute to crypto businesses. There is obviously a little bit of a learning curve. So getting started with some of these resources, learning some of the terminology is helpful. Definitely us in the space are trying to figure out ways to help with this educational resources. And it's just hard when nobody's really incentivized to maintain good resources. There's interesting work happening around, like I was saying, in common goods and public works projects, and kind of how we can support more things that we share that don't necessarily we don't necessarily want to profit on. So kind of figuring out how we can kind of incentivize those cooperative projects, but without having to like extract value from them necessarily. It's still unclear if those will find sustainable models, but there's been a lot of interesting experiments, and a lot of folks are having enough success that it's flowing downhill. And so we'll kind of have to see how that plays out throughout the rest of the bear market and into hopefully next bull market. But Ethereum just announced an upgrade, or is going through an upgrade today to unstake the current validator set. Basically, the validators that have been staking since the Beacon chain, the kind of proof of stake chain for Ethereum, launched in 2020. This will be the first opportunity for those folks to potentially exit. And it doesn't seem like a significant portion of them will exit, but kind of looking at that as a catalyst for moving things into scaling and kind of figuring out how we can really get to transactions that are sub penny, and we can get back to helping onboard folks that make a lot of sense for. Unfortunately, the NFT hype got a little too crazy. And so, folks were spending and burning thousands of dollars in gas and transaction fees to mint these potentially rare NFTs. And that kind of inhibited a lot of other folks from being able to use the chain. So we're just trying to figure out better ways to scale and keep the security around the chain while we scale up these transactions.
Gotcha. So going off of, so we had the COVID 2020 boom and that hype, like you mentioned, and that's kind of died down now 3 years later. How else, or what other way do you think NFTs and crypto are going to be discovered, or how else do you think the more and more people can like find this known in this space?
We've gone through several cycles now. So Bitcoin goes on a 4-year halving cycle. So the next halving will be next year again. So that should encourage the price quite significantly. Either way, usually as the price goes up, then folks start talking about it a little bit more. The interesting cases around identity are really some of the big things that allow a lot more use cases to be unlocked. If you can prove your identity, then you can prove different access to things that might have been restricted to a permissionless protocol. And so being able to kind of fulfill regulations while also remaining truly decentralized and open source. There's interesting innovations happening with like DeFi and streaming money. Like instead of getting paid every 2 weeks, you can get paid every second, which is interesting because it kind of takes care of a large incumbent payday lender that has existed for quite a while. And instead of needing to borrow against a future paycheck, you can start using that paycheck right as soon as you receive it, which becomes pretty compelling. Similarly, for like the future of media and like I was saying with music NFTs, Spotify is paying something like 1/10,000th of a penny per stream. So you're making like $50 to $100 on a million streams. Whereas if you can sell out a sound XYZ drop for like a few ETH, you've made 10-15 million dollar or 10-15 million sales plays basically upfront from those sales. So you're not waiting on Spotify to cut you a check as well. You get a lot of direct access to those collectors that are participating in the sales. Sound has some interesting capabilities where if you collect one of those NFTs, you can actually comment within the song at specific spots. And then that kind of gives you a little bit of visibility as a participant in the process. There's interesting projects like Shibuya, which is a project by Gauck that goes by People Pleaser. She's working with the studio folks out of Japan that are doing basically a curated media agency for new projects. I know Steve Aoki and Seth Green joined on recently. Basically, they're selling NFTs for a representative portion of a longer movie. So they've split up a feature-ish length movie into 10 segments. And as a collector of each segment, you can help vote on the outcomes of the story and help decide how the story unfolds. They also have a fungible token that goes along with it that'll eventually represent the sales and the revenue that flows back. So we're seeing a lot of interesting use cases that are kind of developing. Definitely hard to say on what things will be out there and what will work well, but yeah, seeing some interesting experiments.
Gotcha. And so you mentioned halving. Do you want to kind of explain what halving is and how like the supply of Bitcoin kind of works?
Sure. Yeah, so the way the Bitcoin mining algorithm works, basically when it got started, there was a new block being created every 10 minutes, which is still how it is, but there was being basically 50 Bitcoins being released every 10 minutes with those blocks. And every 4 years, that amount is halved. So we're slowly moving towards a negligible emission, basically, for that. So it's a deflationary inflation. Basically, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins, and we've already minted like 18.5 million at this point, and the remaining 2.5 will be minted over the next 100 years or so. So this is where, as long as the kind of mining power and the desire to acquire those new Bitcoins remains kind of at a similar level, the price needs to kind of be reflective of those lower emission rewards. So that's where we generally see a reflexive increase in the price. Usually it's like 6 to 8 months after the halving occurs. As the miners are selling less Bitcoin, basically with each block, there's less on the market to reduce the price. Notably, Ethereum went through a transition a couple years ago called the merge, or last year they went through this transition called the merge from proof of work to proof of stake, and has largely been deflationary since then. There'll be days of occasional inflationary, but mostly it's been down since the 120 million mark. So it's interesting to see how these different systems are working on their monetary policy. Yeah, Bitcoin's very derived from the initial protocol, basically to join the mining set, and you have to agree that there will only ever be 21 million. Ethereum has been a little bit more decided on what the monetary policy is going to be, but it's deflationary currently, while still like providing rewards to those validators and folks because there's enough usage from transaction fees.
Nice. Kind of leads into the next question. So the next, let's say 5, 10, 50 years, number one, do you think anything will be able to compete with what we're seeing with Bitcoin and Ethereum right now? And the second being, I know that we've seen, I can't remember the top of my head, but some countries using Bitcoin as kind of like their main stake in their government funds and stuff. Do you think we can see more representation with that across the world in the next 5 to 50 years?
Yeah, so we like to joke in crypto that 1 year tends to be about a decade in the regular world. So it's hard to say 50 years out for sure, and even 2 to 3 is going to be tough. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting innovations that are happening and trying to figure out like which ones are going to be valuable. We've already seen like from Bitcoin to Ethereum, ICOs and tokens, DeFi, NFTs, these have all just been kind of flash cycles. And so we've done that all in the last 12, 15 years, which is kind of crazy. It definitely feels like we're just about to hit 2000 or so if we're kind of putting it in the general internet landscape, maybe 5 to 10 years out from the iOS iPhone moment, and kind of like that puts us in a good trajectory for mass adoption around when we feel like we'll hopefully have fees figured out and a lot of this tooling that we need to be able to support businesses and stuff. Yeah, it's hard to say. Like, I don't know if anybody's going to be able to deplatform Bitcoin. I think Ethereum's a good competitor, but maybe they're different enough that they can both survive. There's tons of different platforms, Polkadot, Cosmos, Solana, that are trying to dethrone Ethereum as well, and several other that are trying to take on privacy or other angles. So there's definitely tons to keep an eye on.
Awesome. So we have another question in chat. So why is crypto good compared to fiat?
So this gets into a bit of a philosophical debate sometimes, but fiat is largely backed by our goodwill and the United States government, but doesn't have any like significant backing of physical goods. The fiat system only runs 9 to 5 and not on holidays, so definitely has a disadvantage that it doesn't operate 24/7. A lot of you probably never tried to send an international wire, but they're a pain in the ass and you don't really want to deal with them, and they cost you a lot of money for what they are. So like being able to interact and transact throughout the world, like definitely once we see that point of sale ubiquity, like it'll be interesting to be able to go to countries and pay with crypto instead of having to exchange into native. A lot of folks are using their credit card these days, so they don't really feel that pain as much, but you're still paying transaction fees on those credit cards generally. So we're hoping that we can compete with that as far as being able to settle commerce.
Nice. Looks like we've got another question here too. So I've heard that others are holding crypto as a hedge against fiat inflation. Is there any truth to this?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting strategy. There's been more dollars printed in the last 10 years than were in existence than the previous, whatever it was, 50 or 100. So folks that are looking for an exit from a system where they don't necessarily have control over that decision, they might be looking for exit opportunities. Like I was saying, like Bitcoin is hyper deflating its inflation, and Ethereum is net negative since September of last year. So we're seeing interesting monetary policies that are sustainable and driving value. And so as they continue to get adoption, we'll see if it continues to hold out. It's been a very risk on asset up until this point, but seems like everything's been a zero interest rate phenomenon. So we'll see how it pans out as that environment changes.
Awesome. Well, before we know it, it's 1 o'clock, so we're out of time. I want to say thanks to everybody for interacting in the chat, and a special thank you to Scott, Jacob, and Collin for sharing all your expertise and for making today's session so interesting.